mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Heart webinar series. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we start, just note that you should have a toolbar on the right hand of your screen, and there should be a question box there where you can type in questions you have throughout the webinar. Feel free to ask anything you want, and we'll be happy to address those questions at the end. Also, we have some activities for you to engage in during the presentation, and you can do them simply by thinking your responses in your mind. But if you maybe want to write them down, we wanted to let you know in advance if you want to grab a pen or a pencil and some scrap paper. Also, when the webinar ends, or if you leave early, note that a survey should pop up on your screen. And if you could take that survey to provide us feedback on the webinar, it'd be greatly appreciated. It really helps us to know, what information you received from the webinar, what you liked, improvements that you would like for the future. So it really helps us to develop the webinar series moving forward. If for any reason you don't receive the survey, please contact me at kim@teachheart.org, and I can send it to you via email. So that's kim@teachheart.org. All right, thank you so much. So HEART is a comprehensive humane education organization, and our mission is to develop a generation of compassionate youth who work to create a positive change for animals, people, and the natural environment. And to learn more about our programs and our services, please visit our website, teachheart.org. And with that, we're very happy to introduce today's topic, promoting social responsibility for middle and high school students. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Kim Corona, and I've been working as a professional humane educator for 12 years, teaching comprehensive humane education to K-12 grade students, facilitating numerous professional development workshops, and developing educational resources. I'm really excited for our program today, which I think will have information and resources that will be relevant to your everyday practice and that you'll be able to utilize right away. I'm presenting today with my colleague, Christina Halvershorn, HEART's Indianapolis Program Manager, and I'm going to turn it over to her so that she can introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here with you all today. So I'm Christina, and my background is teaching. So I've been either a public school teacher or a humane educator for 15 years. So 15 years worth of working with students and now teachers. My specialty is in social emotional learning and restorative justice. So I'll pass it back to you, Kim.
Thanks, Christina. So we're going to start with a quick review of humane education basics, what it is and how we define it. And then we'll introduce important developmental tasks and how they relate to humane education. And then we'll provide some examples of how humane education content relates to developmental tasks and demonstrate that by highlighting specific content from our new educational resource guide, Justice for All, Educating Youth for Social Responsibility for Secondary School. The guide is available for free download via our website at teachheart.org/library. And we'll provide that link for you that you can copy and paste via our chat box in a moment.
So to get things rolling, we want to take just a couple minutes to talk about some humane education basics. We have a pretty specific framework and definition of humane education, so we thought it made sense to share a bit of that before we begin to get everybody on the same page. So we're going to take advantage of that question box, that chat box. So I want everybody to think about the word humane. So when you think of this word, sometimes it helps to imagine a person who you really feel embodied the very best of human beings. And I want you to type in your chat box some of the words that spring to mind when you hear this word. This is a way that we like to start out some of our workshops to really make sure that we're thoughtfully considering the terminology behind humane education. So jump in that that question box and type in any words that spring to mind when you think of the word humane. Okay. So as these are coming in, oh, here we go. Yeah, we often hear words like compassion, kindness, benevolence, and I like to think of the word humane as a way to encapsulate the very best traits of human beings. So as humane educators, we know that inspiring and preparing learners to embody these traits doesn't need to be separate from their academic lives. We know that we can use education as a method to bring out these characteristics and to practice and refine them using real interactions in the classroom through experiences that have a direct influence on our community. Now that's both locally and globally. So HEART's definition is inspiring compassion and empathy for people, other species, and the planet, while encouraging youth to think about the biggest problems facing our world today and empowering them to discover and implement solutions that create a better world for all. So that's where we're coming from when we talk about humane education. We want to add one more from our friend and mentor, Zoe Weil. She's the founder for the Institute for Humane Education. And she proposes that humane education's task is to inspire compassion and empathy for people, other species, and the planet, while encouraging youth to think about the bigger problems facing our world today and empowering them to discover and implement solutions that create a better world for all. So you can see that to us, humane education is much bigger than a curriculum or a binder. It's an incredibly potent way to positively influence the world around us. Now, many of us have probably had some less than fruitful dialogue about topics related to social justice, animals, or the environment. Humane education keeps conversations rich and respectful by avoiding some of those pitfalls that many of us have probably experienced. So what isn't humane education? I would say preaching. So whether or not we have deeply held beliefs, humane ed is never about preaching. We are after critical thinking and dialogue with participants, not one-sided or didactic speaking. This also is not about right and wrong or black and white thinking. As soon as we carve out these dichotomies, participants often shut down their consideration and thought. So it's important that we're open to a multitude of perspectives in order to actually grow, especially when we delve into challenging subjects. We seek to meet participants exactly where they are without judgment. It's also not about having all the answers. Teachers, as learners, often have to model that sometimes we don't have all the answers, and that's just an opportunity to learn something new. Often teachers hesitate to dive too deeply into subjects that they don't feel like they're experts in. But we see some of the most exciting learning in classrooms where teachers are learning about new subjects right along with their students. I can remember teachers, as well as my parents, saying, I don't know, let's figure that out together. And that was some of the most exciting times learning to me, knowing that I was learning something right alongside my teachers. And last but not least, humane education is never about shaming. So we might cover subjects that inspire us to question our own behavior and maybe even make changes, but that doesn't mean that we have the right to shame others who have not made similar choices. Shame does more harm than good in such instances, and it's not a part of humane education. Personal reflection, accountability, and responsibility are all useful, but shame doesn't have to be part of that equation.
So to illustrate what we include in our definition of humane education, from following up with what Christina was saying, we thought we'd show you some of the themes in our latest guide. And this guide includes content that addresses social and emotional learning, and it fosters empathy and promotes critical thinking and empowers youth to take action. So it does all the things that Christina was talking about in those definitions of humane ed, and refrains from doing those things that we say humane education is not. So the first theme, everyday practices for a kind classroom, includes 3 activities to utilize in your classroom to foster a safe, inclusive, respectful learning environment. It's Not Fair looks at various societal issues and challenges youth to consider the question, is it fair? They're called out to think critically about these topics, to decide how they think and feel about them, and to consider ways we can work towards creating a more fair society. I always felt sad when people used to say, no one ever said life is fair. That doesn't mean that we can't work towards making it more fair. In media literacy, reading between the lines, youth examine how media influences our consumer choices and the way that we look at ourselves, each other, and the world around us. Youth take an inside look into how the items they wear are produced, what they are made of, who they are made of, in the theme, the high cost of fashion. And finally, the last theme in our guide is what's on our plate. Youth are given the opportunity to question assumptions they have about food, explore factors that influence their food choices, and read about inspiring food justice advocates. All the activities and lessons in this guide are also enhanced by suggested extension activities, and those extension activities include STEM connections, technology integration, research projects, writing activities, drama, art projects, and more. And these activities and lessons are aligned to standards as well. So we really try to make it easy for educators to infuse it into their everyday practice, meeting expectations that they have as teachers.
So you probably looked at those topics and thought, okay, I can see my adolescents being interested in some of those. But we want to make another really important connection here. So bear with us as we take what might seem like a quick detour. So have a look here at some of these behaviors. And now that we have some clarity on what we're talking about with humane education, I want you to think about your middle and high school students. So odds are some of these behaviors might come to mind. So kids who are seeking connection and approval of their peers, resisting others' decisions, especially yours as their teacher, talking back to adults. Never our kids, just kidding. Non-compliance, lack of cooperation, lack of interest and boredom. So all jokes aside, you know, I think we need to take a moment to consider what these behaviors might have to do with humane education. So I want you to jump back into that question box or chat box, whatever you see on yours, and type out, if you can surmise, make a hypothesis, how are some of these behaviors, how could we make a connection to humane education? And I know I'm asking you to really go out there, but try to do some reflection here. This will make this richer if I can see some of your ideas. So I'll give you just a minute. What might some of these behaviors actually have to do with humane education? Yeah, we've got some creative ideas here. So hold on to those hypotheses, those ideas, and we're going to bring it all around through these connections. So we're going to jump to our next slide here. And in order to answer this question, we first need to contextualize why these behaviors are so common in adolescence, okay? Because it's no coincidence that those behaviors look a lot like what you see in your classroom. So in order for all of us to grow, we have had to grapple and master certain developmental tasks. So many of you are probably familiar with the idea of developmental tasks. It's the idea that we have to master certain things to prepare us for the next stage of our lives. So we're really familiar with the tasks associated with young children. And you know, you crawl before you walk. You learn how to make short sounds before you can say complete words and sentences, etc. Some others are you got to bond with your caretaker, learn that certain behaviors have consequences. Okay, so we're familiar with these with young children, but for some reason we stop talking about them when children become adolescents. Now, this to me has been a huge game changer, understanding these developmental tasks, because it allowed me to see what was really going on with my students, become more patient, and realize that the behavior I saw didn't need to be taken personally. So the goal of this is to take from this what we can in order to set up learning that really works for kids this age. And it's no coincidence that we think humane education really addresses these well. So have a look at this chart. This was put together by our friends at Tribes Learning Communities. And so we can we'll take a look here, but we're going to delve into each of these. So this idea that a kid who's seeking connection and approval of their peers is really just seeking social competency. That's something that they know that they're going to need when they're adults. The kids who are resisting others' decisions, what they're trying to do is figure out how to do their own problem solving. If you've got any youth talking back to adults, they're really doing their best to seek independence. Then we've got the kids who are non-compliant and just will not cooperate. They're trying to seek autonomy, or they want to govern themselves and their own actions. And then last but not least, a kid who appears uninterested and bored, they need to develop their own sense of purpose. By the time they're adolescents, they're tired of other people defining what should be important to them or what should take up their time. So we're going to keep going here. And we've connected these behaviors to the developmental tasks, but we promised we would connect them to humane education. So what does this have to do with humane education? We're going to take each of these tasks and illustrate specific ways that humane education can actually help you address that developmental need while delivering relevant and compelling humane education topics that are going to encourage social responsibility. Sounds complicated, but once you see how we do this, hopefully you'll be as excited as we are. So here's a preview of what we're going to cover. Kind of your cheat sheet, if you will. So if you look at these behaviors, what we're saying is humane education very naturally allows kids to develop those tasks, to reach those developmental tasks as we're covering really important, relevant humane education tasks. So you can see that these connections are so important because they help us see that what could be deficits are actually assets because they open the door to humane education. This also helped me understand why so many of my students who might otherwise have behavior issues really thrived when we were covering humane education topics. And, you know, in retrospect, I think a lot of that was this was meeting their need, their developmental needs. So we're going to make these connections and simultaneously introduce you to the guide we've recently released. We put so much work into this that we want to show you how easy it is to use and how exciting some of these lessons are. So again, this is free to download, and if you look in that chat box, you should be able to see where you can download it. So it's all available at our teachheart.org/library. Tons of great resources there. So the way that we're going to do this is use the framework we described and showcase these concepts and lessons that help address that need. So you're going to get a clear picture of what these lessons are about, and you can make note of the page with your group and use it immediately. Some of these things you can take little bits and pieces and use almost instantaneously, and other ones you want to go and have a deeper theme and cover it for a longer period of time. So our guides are so densely packed with fascinating lessons that we wanted to make sure that we really highlighted some of them for you. So here we go. So let's start with the work that students are doing to seek social competency. So pretending that learning happens in a vacuum hasn't helped any of us create positive classroom culture or healthy relationships. Learning doesn't happen in spite of relationships, it happens because of them. So let that sink in. That's a really important thing for us to heed. And teenagers especially, adolescents especially, care so much about their peers. Now, why wouldn't we take advantage of that and use it to help in our classrooms? So taking the time for students to understand how to coexist in peaceful ways, that's time well spent. We teach you exactly how to do it in this guide. So students find that these skills teach them how to understand and thrive in other communities as well. And then we see that the behaviors and skills that we learn in our classroom communities, it's really a microcosm of the world around us and the work and the strategies we need in our larger local and global communities. So let's take a deeper look at what we're talking about here. So a simple but profound activity we recommend actually is a strategy employed in the field of restorative justice. And this is something I do with every group I serve. So allowing students the ability to create and have authentic voice pertaining to the rules that will govern them is a powerful way to create positive classroom culture and to give your students a pathway to seek social competency. So think about how much confusion there is around boundaries in school. Now, we might not have confusion about them, but I can guarantee you some of our kids do. For example, if I go into your school and I ask students, can I touch or hug my peers? You're going to get different answers from every child. How about what words are offensive? Or what's the right way to resolve a conflict or get my needs met? So there's a lot of gray area, and often we make rules that make sense to adults but fail to bring students into the conversations. And then we spend all year bickering about where those boundaries actually are and where they should be. Why wouldn't we just co-create that social contract? And that's really, really important also to make sure that we aren't imposing cultural boundaries that are not appropriate for our students. So why don't we talk about that? Why don't we talk about, is eye contact an expectation? Why or why not? Let's make sure we're including students in that conversation. And I do this with almost every group I serve. It saves me so much grief. You have to be willing to budge if a particular issue is really important to the group. But then that creates a dynamic where they're so much more likely to listen to you and heed your own requests and needs for the group. So simply participating in activities like this engages the adolescent who's already thinking about this sort of thing anyway. It sounds so simple, but I guarantee you it can have a really profound effect. And you can do this at any point in the year. Another really, really important element in this guide is teaching students how to process both positive and challenging subjects as a community. So few of us have polished that skill set of listening, contemplating, speaking from the heart, and reaching agreements that work for all, among others. Think of all the adults you know who have not mastered those skills, right? Unfortunately, we could probably name several, maybe even folks that we know very well. So creating time and space for this type of skill development, it's a gift for kids because no matter what path they pursue, especially for kids who are interested in humane ed topics and interested in making a difference for animals and our environment, these skills are going to work for them for their entire lives. So we also teach, so this one is particularly about the community circle. So how do we use our community to solve problems? And how do we use our time with one another to enrich relationships and really learn important things from one another? We also explicitly teach how to walk through conflicts using a tool called STEP and a number of other SEL skills. So if you're interested in the field of restorative justice, this is the proactive work that we in the field say this should be about 80% of the work that we do in restorative justice. So even if you do just these couple elements of building community every day, letting kids in on the agreement making, you're actually doing a lot of the restorative practices, restorative justice work that the practitioners need to do. So we'll keep moving. And I would be remiss not to mention the entire next section of the guide, which is explicitly designed to get students critically thinking about things like stereotyping, bias, and several other relevant topics. We hear from people all of the time that they know it's the right moment to have some of these challenging conversations, but they don't know how, or they're nervous how it'll go with their students. So we've done the work for you. We've created tried and true, field-tested activities that we stand behind that can really get you to some fruitful and meaningful conversation. We also have beautiful, thoughtful lessons on perspective taking designed to inspire compassion and empathy. So this guide is just teeming with opportunities to develop that social competence. Your students might not know why these lessons pull them in, but you will. They're meeting a need that many kids don't even know that they have. So we want to illustrate this concept that our activities are meant not to be dogmatic. So there's room for creative and independent adolescents to develop their own meaning and learning. So take a minute and we're going to try out this activity together. So part of this activity is for kids to really think about the ways that they have been boxed in by their peers, by society, by classmates. So what I want you to do is think about this, and you're just thinking about this for yourself. You don't have to share this with anyone. But I want you to think about what would go on the inside of a box, which is how people expect you to behave. So what messages are you hearing and seeing that tell you how you should think, how you should act, how you should look? So getting people and adolescents specifically comfortable enough with this element is really important. So what are the pressures that we have on ourselves in terms of how we should behave, think, act, and look? And then on the outside of the box, make a note of who you really are. So who do you want to be? What's your best quality? What are your talents? What's true for you that often people get wrong? So as adults, many of us have probably thought about this interesting relationship between the ways that we are told we are supposed to behave or look or feel, and then those things that might be parts of us that we wish we could live or emerge. So this might not be a new element to you or I, but think of doing this as a teen and really sorting out some of these issues. This can be a powerful and a really important way to help adolescents proceed through what they're already grappling with anyway. And then we can launch into some really fascinating discussions around stereotyping and bias about based on the lived experience of your students. So you can see that when we say that humane education really gives students the opportunity to develop social competence, we aren't exaggerating. This is really about them looking in the mirror and taking a deep dive. So let's move on to our next competency. So youth have a desire to do their own problem solving. And this one stands out as such a clear fit for the entire field of humane education. So all this work is not about burdening youth with the problems of society, global warming, poverty, but it's about finding and freeing the creative and brilliant solutions that they have inside that could actually address those issues. So let's talk about what that actually looks like. So to understand what I mean by problem solving, I want you to think about what you've learned about water issues. So think about maybe you had a lesson in high school, college, maybe even earlier, and I want you to think about the ways that that topic is covered. So talking about pollution, conservation, all of it. So if your experience was like mine, when I was exposed to these types of lessons, they were just cut and dry. It was almost like a list of do this, don't do that, end of story. So not only was that not particularly inspiring, but I was never asked to actually engage in the kind of thinking of how to address these problems holistically. So taking into account humans, animals, ecological perspectives. So think about all the nuance there and all of the perspectives that we need to consider if we are to actually tackle the water issues in a serious way. Kids, and I would say no, humans of all ages, like to be asked for their perspective and for their wisdom. So our lessons ask students to delve deeper and engage in critical thinking to solve these problems, making the connections to our own choices and far beyond. So our take on water issues in the lesson, Where Has All the Water Gone?, creates so many opportunities for students to think about the problem from a variety of perspectives and approach the problem with their own solutions based on what they learned. So engaging at this deep level not only gets them really connected and critically thinking about this, but they're really flexing those problem-solving muscles. So an aspect that I've found really powerful about humane education is its ability to pull kids into subjects that they had no idea they were interested in. So this lesson is on the life cycle of a t-shirt, and it's called The Cost of a T-Shirt, and it does a brilliant job of allowing students to glimpse the impact of a t-shirt on workers, animals, consumers, ecosystems, etc. So what I see a lot in my community is when adults try to develop problem-solving skills in youth, they keep the conversation to topics that we think are already related to youth. So we might look to youth and say, okay, we need to talk about youth violence or drugs. And I appreciate the intention there. But I also think that starting with problems that are really close to home can be paralyzing for students. If you're only asked to practice problem solving with the issues that are closest to the surface or that might make you the most vulnerable, you might shy away. I've also seen so many kids that struggle with peer relationships shine when we start talking about animal or environmental issues. So diversifying the content of our activities and conversations can elicit very, very different interest levels and abilities. So this lesson on the t-shirt works really well because of the entry point of fashion, something that many kids are already interested in, or at the very least are connected to as consumers. So this activity successfully asks students to develop a systemic and personal solution for reducing a product's negative impact on people, animals, and the planet. So that sounds like a mouthful, but take a second and find a tag on some clothing that you're wearing. Now this is a webinar, but I'm assuming most of us have some clothing on. So find something that you can identify as a tag and try to figure out where was your clothing made, and What do we know about the labor practices for that company? Why don't we know much about the labor practices for that company? What materials are it made of? And this lesson allows us to understand all of the nuanced details about things like cotton and all of these things that have impact on workers and the environment in a way that I found to be really fascinating with kids, because there's an immediate tangible connection to their lives. So we'll keep going within this theme of the high cost of fashion, but this lesson is from What Are We Wearing? This is a lesson that asks students to imagine that they actually own a store, and they have to make some fairly complicated decisions about what products to sell and carry based on several different levels of information. So not only are they faced with ethical dilemmas, they're actually asked to explain what they would do in that position. So no right or wrong answers, which is really exciting to middle and high school students. The first time you do an activity like this with middle and high school students, they're confused because they're very used to a very dogmatic, there is a right and wrong answer, and we're constantly seeking the right answer so that we can get the best grade we can. So sometimes you see kids kind of freeze for a minute, and then once they realize that we're actually looking for that creativity and that problem-solving ability, they really get excited about it. So practice making decisions like this help students flex and strengthen those problem-solving muscles that I alluded to before. And it also soothes their need to solve things on their own, rather than being told how to think and what to do. I'm going to pass it back to Kim.
Thanks, Christina. It was great hearing about those first couple competencies. And the next one that we want to discuss is seeking independence. Adolescents are constantly seeking independence. And the difficulty we often have as adults is letting go and trusting them, which causes a big issue in allowing you to successfully find that independence. For good reason, we might not be ready to allow them the independence of staying out late and making certain types of decisions for themselves. But why not work towards immersing them in a world where independent thought is not only valued, but encouraged? If we want to prepare them for life, young people need to develop independent thinking. A core element of human education, as mentioned several times, is critical thinking, and most of the lessons in this guide address this vital developmental task because they're purposefully designed to give youth the opportunity to freely share their thoughts and opinions and to think independently without being told what is right or wrong. They'll always be challenged to question themselves and to back up their thoughts with verifiable facts and thoughtful justifications, but they'll know that they're in a safe learning environment where they can share what they really think, free from judgment. Having said that, we are going to focus on two specific examples that are representative of how we use human education to support youth in seeking independence. In this lesson, Understanding Peer Pressure, youth participate in simulations that involve peer pressure so that they experience how it can effectively work in influencing one's behavior, and understand how it can suppress independent thought. In the second half of the lesson, youth are challenged to think more critically about societal influence and how it can be different from peer pressure. Youth read a fictional newspaper that's based on actual articles about how societal influence increased the number of adults participating in recycling in their neighborhood, which most would agree is a positive behavior. But youth will discuss if they support or oppose using societal influence if the intention is to be used in promoting positive behavior. So whether or not they actually think that we should do that, even if it is promoting something that they support. The other example we wanted to share is our lesson, The Dirt Behind Diamonds and Gold. Initially, youth are invited to share some of their first associations with diamonds and gold. So I want to ask you to take a few moments and you can, think to yourself, or if you want to type in the box provided in your toolbar, what are some words or phrases our society typically attaches to diamonds and gold? So just take a few moments and think about that. And you can type that in if you want to. Right. So some typical associations that we might have are diamonds are a girl's best friend, or you have to use a diamond when you're getting engaged, or um, gold is very precious. They're beautiful, expensive, rare. These are a lot of things that our society associates with diamonds and gold, and they may be at some negative consequences or stereotypes. So after youth share that, they're given a short reading to learn about the concerns related to the impacts that diamond and gold have on people, other species, and the planet. And they have discussions to compare their initial impressions that they gave at the beginning to their impressions after they read the article about the excavation and production of them. And the lesson is not developed to tell youth how to react to what they learned about diamonds and gold, nor how to respond. They discuss the value that diamonds and gold have in their own opinion, the ethical implications of purchasing these gems, alternative options that are available, and whether or not they think those options are realistic and why. And they also discuss what, if anything, should be changed about the diamond and gold industries. So again, they're challenged to decide for themselves what they think, and it can be difficult, but we want to facilitate these discussions so they can come up with their own opinions and their own conclusions.
So a similar idea is autonomy. So seeking autonomy. So a child who might be exhibiting noncompliance and a lack of cooperation really might just be trying to figure out how they can be more self-governed. That's what autonomy is about. So adolescents are trying to learn how to manage their own lives and make their own decisions. So let's imagine some ways that we can use humane education to tap into that urge in a healthy and meaningful way. So let's take a deeper look into how humane ed might support youth who are seeking autonomy. So before we get into this, I do want to remind everybody that we will have time for questions at the end. So please feel free to type your questions as you're thinking about them. We're sort of rounding the corner of the final phase of our content. So if you have some questions, please feel free to write those. That way we can make sure we've got time to get to everything. All right, so let's get back to it. So most of, because of the amount of media our youth consume, any conversation about media literacy is rich these days. So teaching teens about media literacy is a really interesting way of encouraging them to assert their autonomy from corporate and media persuasion. So none of us, if you ask us, none of us want to have our decisions made by any outside influence. But when we take a deeper look into the ways that these things work, particularly advertisement and labels on the products we consume, we realize that we often do purchase and believe certain things based on strategic marketing. So realizing the way that advertising works, it really fires teens up and it gives them a sense of power. And it's an authentic power, one that can help them understand and behave differently. It's freeing to realize all of the ways that we've been tricked into wanting the latest and greatest new product. So this is a portion of the information that we share in the Who Decides What's Cool lesson. So that's on page 80 of the guide. And I find these fascinating. This is a list of common advertising techniques that are used as a way for participants to understand how ads work. So kids quickly realize this is at odds with their desire to stand out, be unique, and grow into the individual that they are. So particularly notice the idea of the bandwagon and the "are you cool enough" ideas. These are techniques. And if you take a look at those, it shows you how complicated advertising can be, especially for teens. But this is a really fun activity, because if you just give this to a group of teens, I bet you they could identify at least one commercial for each of these techniques. So it's pretty fascinating how deeply entrenched with the media kids are, and this only seems right for them to be able to be literate, to be able to consume it in thoughtful ways. So another epiphany kids have when they're immersed in humane education is the realization that even our food choices are often made from factors we've never even considered. So understanding these influences is powerful because it sets teens up to be able to first understand and then make thoughtful choices for themselves. So this ability to self-govern feels really satisfying to adolescents because it's meeting that need that simply feels natural to them. So this comes from the Why We Eat What We Eat lesson, which is on page 163 of our guide. And it's really exciting for kids to understand specifically what are the things that influence us to consume the kinds of food that we eat. I actually learned a lot from this lesson myself, and I've been thinking about this for years. I think it's a really interesting and exciting lesson. So you can see on the right some of these, internal versus external influences on food choices.
So the last developmental task that we're going to discuss is sense of purpose. And I think we all know having a sense of purpose is an essential part of life for fulfillment, connection, and really healthy survival. And the topics that we cover in humane education, they engage youth with pressing issues facing our world today. And within that, they foster a connection with other people, other species, and our natural world, and in both the local and our global communities. Humane education seeks to inspire youth to understand our responsibility to each other, cultivating a sense of purpose for each and every one of us to create a just, compassionate, and sustainable world for all. In our lesson, Food Fighters, Real Stories of Food Justice Advocates, youth learn about individuals who are using effective strategies to transform our food industry into a just system. They gain awareness of techniques that can be used to create positive change and are inspired by the sense of purpose that these food justice fighters have. Through their stories, youth become emboldened to become involved with this issue or whatever issue they are most passionate about, and within that, they discover a sense of purpose. Similarly, in the lesson Forest Protectors, youth learn about reasons people are cutting down trees and the reasons why some others devote their lives to protecting them. At the end of the lesson, youth hear stories of successful forest protectors and the effective means with which they took to protect trees. Again, they're hearing stories of people who have purpose, and it will hopefully trigger their own sense of purpose and help them to recognize the value in finding what you're most passionate about and getting involved in it. Our aim is to encourage you to recognize that we all have a stake in these issues and to know that there's purpose all around us and for them to connect with whatever most speaks to them. So after reviewing these developmental tasks, let's take a moment to review them. So I just want you to see these again and see those initial behaviors that Christina talked about, the developmental tasks that can help to take those behaviors and make them more positive and pro-social when we develop those skills, and how humane education can help us to get there. Hopefully today's webinar gave you a good introduction into how humane education can be used to address these, and how these tasks are helpful and needed to practice pro-social behavior. And while we demonstrated lessons that we've developed that you can use to achieve these developmental tasks, you may have your own content as well. So we encourage you to look at the content you've developed and see how it's already addressing these developmental tasks, or how you might be able to modify them so that you can really enhance your lesson to address these developmental tasks, or be aware of these tasks as you develop content moving forward.
We're so excited to turn these lessons loose and for you to harness the power of humane education.
We really are. This project has truly been a labor of love. We strive to put everything we've learned through the years in teaching engaging programs and to put it in this guide so that you can utilize this content and reach even more youth. So we hope you use this guide and that it's helpful to you, and please share it widely. We welcome you to stay in touch with us. You can contact Christina or me via email if you have any questions. And if you teach any of the content from this guide and you see it helping with these social competencies, please let us know and share your stories. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Pinterest. And if you're not currently on our e-newsletter, please visit our website. That's again, teachheart.org, and sign up for our newsletter because we have exciting new programs and resources that will be coming out in the future. And when they're available, we'll be announcing it through that newsletter.
So with that, we want to open it up to questions. So if you haven't already, please feel free to type in any questions that you have. If you're bashful, you can also feel free to email either myself or Kim any questions that you have. We've really enjoyed sharing this with you today. This is so much fun for us because we've been able to live so many of these lessons and see the impact on kids and allowing especially teenagers to follow their passions. And so this is so much fun for us to get to share this, hopefully with practitioners like you who are going to take this and really create some change makers. Kim, are you seeing any questions?
I don't see any questions at this time. But like you said, if people, don't have questions right now, they can always get in touch with us later. We're always available.
That's right. And like Kim said, if you do any of these lessons, we love to see photos and stories and even little anecdotes. That means the world to us because sometimes as we create these lessons, we don't get to see the real impact on students. So don't be shy. You're family now. You've been through our webinar, so please don't hesitate to reach out and make some connections with us. And if you'd like to, we can share some of that out via our own social media.
So we just want to say thanks again for joining us today, and a reminder, when we close out the webinar, please look out on your screen. The survey should pop up, and so please don't close it, open it, and we love your feedback. And if you don't get that, please email me. Again, that's kim@teachheart.org, and I can send that survey to you. So generally it pops up, but we have heard from participants that sometimes they haven't seen it. So with that, that concludes our webinar, and thank you so much again for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.
Thanks for everything you do for people, animals, and the planet.